The royal world is in shock today as news spreads of an announcement once thought impossible. King Charles has officially stripped his brother, Prince Andrew, of all remaining royal titles, marking a historic and dramatic end to a long and controversial chapter within the House of Windsor. Once known as the proud Duke of York, Andrew now stands completely alone, without the armor of monarchy, without the shield of privilege. The man who once strutted through palace halls with unshakable confidence, adored by his mother and indulged by the royal system, is now little more than a cautionary tale of arrogance, entitlement, and self-inflicted downfall. Once the Queen's favorite son, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor finds himself cast out of the royal fold, exiled from family gatherings, and banned from royal estates. But this fall from grace did not happen overnight. It was not a sudden catastrophe, but the inevitable collapse of a man who spent a lifetime mistaking privilege for character and power for purpose. Behind the polished uniforms and well-practiced charm, there was always something darker, an unshakable belief that rules were for other people and that his birthright guaranteed his worth. Long before the scandal that destroyed him, the warning signs were already there. At Gordonston, the prestigious Scottish school attended by his father Prince Philip and his brothers Charles and Edward, Andrew's arrogance was already infamous. Classmates recalled him as an unbearable show-off, constantly reminding others of his royal blood, as if the crown itself hovered over his head. "Do you know who I am?" That phrase, reportedly his favorite, would become the refrain of his life. Teachers saw through the charm and the privilege. They described a boy whose confidence exceeded his talent, whose ego outgrew his empathy, and whose desire for admiration masked a deep lack of self-awareness. While his older brother Charles bore the burdens of destiny with quiet endurance, Andrew demanded adoration, confusing fear with respect. In his explosive biography The Rise and Fall of the House of York, author Andrew Lowney paints a striking portrait of a man who never outgrew the habits of a spoiled schoolyard bully. As he climbed through the ranks of the Royal Navy, that same arrogance hardened into entitlement. At Dartmouth, his peers called him pompous and out of touch, describing him as a man trapped in another time, someone who saw authority not as duty but as his personal right. He expected his car to be saluted by cadets, his name to be spoken with reverence, and his status to be unquestioned. Officers joked in private about the absurdity of saluting a car, but few dared to challenge him. To Andrew, the royal title was not a symbol of service, it was a weapon of dominance. Behind palace walls, the same pattern played out again and again. He demanded obedience, craved attention, and recoiled from humility. Former palace staff described his strange habits, especially his infamous obsession with his teddy bears. Over 70 plush toys were meticulously arranged across his bed, each in a precise position outlined on a laminated chart. If even one toy was out of place, his temper would explode. Maids and aides endured tantrums over curtains drawn a minute too early or trousers pressed a fraction too sharp. Even bathwater at the wrong temperature could trigger an outburst. Servants were required to bow every time he entered a room, and if they forgot, he would snap, "Let's try that again." Behind the grandeur of royalty, Andrew's temper ruled, and his privilege defined him. The gap between Andrew's self-image and reality grew wider with time. He saw himself as charming, clever, and indispensable to the monarchy, while others saw only arrogance and denial. Long before Jeffrey Epstein entered the picture, Andrew had already become tabloid fodder, nicknamed Randy Andy, for his reckless romantic escapades and extravagant lifestyle. But beneath the bravado was insecurity. Former partners described him as naive, suspicious that women were only drawn to his title, and obsessed with being admired without doing anything to earn respect. This contradiction, craving adoration while rejecting accountability, became the defining theme of his life. When the Epstein scandal finally broke, it didn't just tarnish Andrew's image, it destroyed it. His infamous BBC interview, meant to clear his name, became one of the most disastrous public appearances in royal history. Tone-deaf, arrogant, and astonishingly unaware, it turned public skepticism into outrage. Yet even then, Andrew was reportedly stunned by the backlash. He couldn't understand why the same public that once bowed to him was now demanding his exile. To him, accountability was humiliation, and humility, weakness. King Charles's decision to strip his brother of all titles was both inevitable and symbolic, a definitive act separating duty from disgrace. Andrew had become a liability not just to the royal family, but to the very idea of royal integrity. Sources claim the final straw came when Andrew refused multiple times to vacate Royal Lodge, the Windsor estate he clung to as his last vestige of status. In one decisive phone call, Charles ended decades of indulgence. No titles, no privileges, no royal home. The man once known as His Royal Highness is now simply Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The irony is striking. The boy who once demanded, "Do you know who I am?" has become the man no one wants to remember. His name, once synonymous with wealth and power, now drips with scandal and shame. His portrait quietly removed from palace walls, his presence erased from royal events, his legacy reduced to whispers and tabloid headlines. Friends say he now lives in isolation, spending his days playing video games, lashing out at his few remaining aides, and insisting he's the victim of a conspiracy. In his mind, time will vindicate him, that one day the monarchy will need him again. But that illusion, like his title, has vanished. Andrew's story is not just about personal disgrace, it's a masterclass in self-destruction. A lifetime of unchecked entitlement, arrogance, and denial has finally collapsed under its own weight. Every scandal, every tantrum, every abuse of privilege built the walls of his downfall, brick by brick. What remains is not a prince, not a hero, not even a villain, just a man stripped of identity and illusion, forced at last to face a world that no longer cares who he is. The royal mask has fallen, revealing the truth beneath, a man who never learned humility. And perhaps that is the real tragedy of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, not that he lost his titles, but that he never understood what they truly meant. His downfall wasn't the result of one terrible mistake, it was the sum of a lifetime of small indulgences, of arrogance hardened into entitlement, of entitlement turning into scandal, and scandal into exile. Once the Queen's golden boy, now the monarchy's greatest cautionary tale. In the end, the man who demanded respect from everyone met the one force that refused to bow: consequence.